So I want you to imagine standing at the base of this, like, 72-foot bell tower, and the year is 1904.
Right.
And the men who surround the architect, her own peers, basically they are openly scoffing at her design.
Oh, yeah. They're just actively mocking it.
Exactly. They claim the material she's using is this massive aesthetic disaster. They're whispering that it's, an amateur vanity project and like a huge safety hazard just waiting to collapse. But then in April of 1906, the Great San Francisco earthquake hits. The city is essentially leveled, right, by seismic shockwaves, by fire. But that 72-foot bell tower, it does not sustain a single crack.
It remains one of the most definitive I told you so moments in, well, probably all of architectural history.
Yeah.
And it really served as the launch pad for a career that would completely alter the American landscape. And it was all built on the back of a technology that her male colleagues just, frankly, fundamentally misunderstood.
Welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to really track the journey of an absolute mastermind. We are looking at the life of someone who built an architectural empire. We're talking over 700 buildings across California.
Which is just a staggering number.
It really is. Someone who conquered the notoriously exclusive boys' club of early 20th century architecture, built a literal castle for an eccentric billionaire, and then in a twist that, honestly, completely defies modern logic, actively tried to erase her own personal narrative from history.
Yeah, she wanted no part of the fame.
Right. So today we are unpacking the encyclopedic and biographical records of Julia Morgan. Have you ever felt like you had to be twice as good just to get a seat at the table?
Oh, wow. I think a lot of people can relate to that.
Right. Well, this deep dive is going to show you how one woman used an earthquake, a billionaire, and a lot of reinforced concrete to permanently change the game.
And to understand the sheer scale of that eventual 700-building empire, we really first have to examine the structural barriers she faced, like before she ever laid a single brick.
Yeah.
Because Morgan didn't just design buildings. She had to engineer a path through a society that was aggressively designed to keep her out of the room.
So that path starts with a childhood defined by this kind of inverted power dynamic and an invisible physical struggle. She was born in 1872 in San Francisco and raised in Oakland.
Right. And her father, Charles, he was a mining engineer who simply could not make a business work. Like, he tried drilling for oil down in Santa Paula, and it was just a complete and utter failure.
Total failure.
Yeah. So that failure meant the family relied entirely on her mother's side for survival. Her mother came from the really wealthy Parmalee family, so there's this Parmalee fortune holding them up.
Right.
And growing up in a household where the women held the definitive economic power, that gave Morgan a really early foundational blueprint for female independence.
But she also had this, physical vulnerability that she had to manage her entire life. So as a kid, she contracted scarlet fever.
Oh.
Yeah. And she survived, obviously, but it left her prone to severe chronic ear infections. And I was looking at this detail in the sources, and it forces you to reframe her entire career.
Wow, so?
Well, think about it. She spent decades on these chaotic, noisy, dust-filled construction sites, managing hundreds of laborers, all while battling chronic ear pain and infection.
Oh, geez. Yeah, that sounds agonizing.
Right.
But, that physical vulnerability that she had to manage as a child, it instilled this quiet, really fierce resilience, a resilience she immediately had to weaponize the second she tried to go to college. Because she graduates high school in 1890, completely dedicated to becoming an architect.
Right.
But the University of California, Berkeley, they did not have an architecture program.
Wait, I'm stuck on something here. If the premier university in your area doesn't even teach the subject you want to master, how do you even move forward? I feel like most people would just, pivot to a different career or accept defeat.
Right. But she adapted by looking at what Berkeley did offer. So she enrolled and majored in civil engineering instead. And in 1894, she became the first woman to earn a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering at the university. With honors, by the way.
I want to pause on that because engineering and architecture, especially back in the late 19th century, they seem like entirely different languages.
Oh, completely.
Like, one is focused purely on math and load-bearing capacities, and the other is just focused on aesthetics and proportion and art.
Which is precisely why this apparent setback became her greatest hidden advantage.
Wait, really?
Yeah. Most traditional architects of her era were essentially trained as artists. They designed these beautiful facades, but relied on other people to figure out if the building would actually stand up.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right. So by studying civil engineering, Morgan learned the hard math of shear forces, load paths, structural integrity. She wasn't just drawing pretty pictures. She was mastering the deep mechanics of stability.
And while she is mastering that math at Berkeley, she crosses paths with an engineering lecturer named Bernard Maybeck. He's this visionary architect who encourages her to aim for the absolute pinnacle of the profession. He basically tells her she needs to go to Paris and study at the École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts.
Right, because the Beaux-Arts was the undisputed center of the architectural universe at the time. Getting a certificate from there was the ultimate global credential.
And this is but the Beaux-Arts had a strict policy. No women allowed. Never in the entire history of the institution had a woman been permitted to study architecture there.
Right. The cultural tides in France, however, were beginning to shift. So in 1897, this union of French women artists, a group Morgan actively interacted with, by the way, she affectionately called them Bohemians.
I love that.
Yeah, they began applying immense political and social pressure on the school to open its doors to women.
So they finally let her take the entrance exam. First try. She doesn't place high enough. She studies harder, takes it again in 1898, and this time she places well into the top 30 candidates.
Which should have been enough.
It should have. But this is where the institutional gatekeeping gets almost cartoonishly villainous. Okay, let's unpack this. The examiners look at her scores, realize she's a woman, and just arbitrarily lower her marks to push her out of the top 30.
Yeah, it was not a flaw in the system. It was overt, deliberate exclusion designed to make her give up.
It's like trying to hack into a computer mainframe where the administrators are actively changing your passwords while you type. How do you even fight a system that openly cheats?
You outwork it. I mean, she studied relentlessly for over a year under a tutor named Francois Benjamin Chaussemiche. And on her third attempt, she placed 13th out of 376 applicants.
Wow.
Yeah. The score was so undeniably high that the examiners had absolutely no choice but to admit her.
But the Beaux-Arts had one more trapdoor built into their rules, didn't they? Oh, yeah. They expelled all scholars when they turned 30 years old.
That is insane. So because the examiners forced her to waste years taking the test 3 times, she is now racing against a ticking clock. The standard architectural program takes 5 years to complete.
Right.
Morgan only has 3 years before her 30th birthday.
Which meant she had to compress half a decade of the world's most rigorous, sleep-depriving architectural training into an impossibly narrow window. As her 30th birthday approached in early 1902, she submitted this staggeringly complex design for a palatial theater, and she earned her certificate just under the wire, becoming the first woman to ever graduate from the program.
She basically beat the most prestigious institution in the world at their own rigged game.
Exactly.
But, earning the degree and actually getting paid what you are worth are 2 very different battles.
Yeah.
She returns to San Francisco and takes a job working for John Galen Howard, who is this prominent architect overseeing the UC Berkeley master plan. Right, and she executes brilliant work on the campus. She heavily contributed to projects like the Hearst Theater, and Howard's response to her undeniable talent is just deeply revealing of the labor dynamics of that era.
Yeah, think about a time you found out a coworker was making more money than you for doing significantly less work. Now imagine your boss actually bragging about that discrepancy to your face. Howard told a colleague that Morgan was, quote, an excellent draftsman whom I have to pay almost nothing as it is a woman.
It is a stunningly brazen admission of economic exploitation. He recognized her Beaux-Arts certified genius, but saw her gender purely as a cost-saving measure for his firm.
I just hate how historical retrospectives often gloss over this kind of detail.
Yeah, sure.
We usually get this sanitized narrative like, oh, she faced challenges, but she persevered. No, Morgan didn't just quietly persevere. She recognized she was being robbed.
Yeah.
She quietly saved the pennies Howard was paying her, took on side projects, and in 1904, she walked away. She opened her own office in San Francisco, officially becoming California's first licensed female architect.
And her very first major commission out of the gate perfectly synthesized her engineering math with her architectural art. Susan Tolman Mills, who was the president of Mills College, hired Morgan to design a bell tower.
Which brings us back to the 72-foot tower from our intro, El Campin. Mills hired Morgan partly to support a female architect, but also ironically because Morgan charged less than the established male firms.
Right.
But Morgan doesn't just build a standard tower. She decides to build it using reinforced concrete.
And we really need to explain why this was so controversial. Morgan had studied reinforced concrete extensively in Paris, but at the time in America, concrete was mostly relegated to, like, industrial bridges or retaining walls.
Yeah, it was seen as ugly.
Exactly. Completely inappropriate for aesthetic college architecture.
Wait, I'm trying to picture the mechanics here, though. Concrete is basically liquid rock. If an earthquake hits, rock doesn't bend, it shatters. So why would she choose an untested, heavy material for a tall tower in a known seismic zone?
Because she didn't just use concrete, she used reinforced concrete. And this is where her civil engineering degree changes history.
Okay.
Concrete on its own is fantastic at holding heavy weight, what engineers call compressive strength, but it snaps under bending or shaking. Steel rebar, on the other hand, bends easily, but can't support a massive building on its own.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. By embedding a skeleton of steel rebar inside the poured concrete, Morgan created a composite material. It had the strength to hold a 72-foot tower upright and the elasticity to flex and absorb the sheer forces of an earthquake without snapping.
But the male architects around her, men trained purely in aesthetics, they didn't understand the math. Bernard Ransom, a male coworker whose own father was, ironically, a concrete pioneer, he openly distrusted Morgan's abilities. He actively undermined her expertise, convincing people the tower was unsafe. Even at the dedication ceremony, the praise she received was dripping with patronizing shock. One speaker marveled that the tower was reared by the genius of a woman's brain, as if her gender made the concrete a miraculous anomaly.
Yeah, they couldn't evaluate the structural mechanics, so
No.
they qualified her success based on her biology. Up until April 1906, that is.
Right. The San Francisco earthquake and the ensuing fires just level the region. Thousands of buildings collapse. El Campanile survives without a single crack. Mother Nature basically audited her math, and Morgan passed with flying colors.
The very thing that made her an outsider. Her rigorous engineering background in a field dominated by male artists became her ultimate shield against the patriarchal establishment.
Wow.
She leveraged a horrific natural disaster to permanently leapfrog over systemic sexism.
Because overnight, every wealthy family and business owner in San Francisco realizes they need buildings that won't kill them in their sleep.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Her rare, proven knowledge of earthquake-resistant construction made her the most valuable architect on the West Coast.
Yeah.
The landmark Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco had been severely damaged by fire after the quake. The original steel supports had warped in the heat, so they brought Morgan in to redesign and restore the interior structure.
She completes the Fairmont restoration in less than a year, which is insane. And that project acts as the skeleton key that unlocks America's most powerful families. Phoebe Apperson Hearst was so impressed by the Fairmont that she hired Morgan, and more importantly, she introduced Morgan to her son.
William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper magnate.
Yep.
That single introduction sparked a professional relationship that spanned 3 generations of the Hearst family, and it led to the defining project of Morgan's career, La Cuesta Encantada, perched overlooking San Simeon. We know it today as Hearst Castle.
The logistics of this project are staggering to me. It began in 1919 and lasted until 1947, only stopping because Hearst's health declined.
It's a massive timeline.
Logistically, how do you even manage a project of this scale? She is building this hybrid of Mission Revival with its classic stucco walls and red clay tile roofs, Spanish colonial and Moorish styles, featuring incredibly intricate geometric tile work. And she is doing all of this on a remote hilltop.
Well, she wasn't just drafting blueprints. She was operating as a master logistician. She had to build roads up the mountain just to transport materials.
Wait, she built the roads?
Yes.
Yeah.
She managed armies of craftsmen. She seamlessly integrated massive, heavy European antiques that Hearst purchased abroad into the reinforced concrete shells she designed. She even personally designed the custom tiles sourced from California fans.
And Hearst Castle wasn't even the only mega project she did for him. She designed Windtun, which is this expansive Bavarian-style village sitting on 50,000 acres of forest.
Yeah.
She worked on Babacora, his 1.5-acre cattle rancho down in Mexico. She's catering to the whims of a man with virtually unlimited resources.
Yet, if we look at the broader scope of her 700 building portfolio, the Hearst projects are only one half of a wildly extreme dual career.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. This is the part of her operational genius that fascinates me most. While she is building these literal monuments to infinite wealth, she is simultaneously taking on massive budget-conscious projects for women's institutions.
Right.
She designed the Asilomar Conference Grounds in Pacific Grove for the YWCA. She designed the Hollywood Studio Club, the San Francisco Chinatown YWCA, and facilities across Utah, Arizona, and Hawaii.
She also designed 6 separate buildings for Mills College and a nursing home for elderly women that is now known as the Heritage on the Marina.
It's like a chef who runs an ultra-exclusive 3-Michelin-star molecular gastronomy restaurant for a single billionaire, while simultaneously designing the supply chain for a network of comforting, highly accessible neighborhood bakeries to feed the local community.
That's a great analogy.
I mean, how do those two client bases even coexist in one firm?
They coexist because Morgan fundamentally understood architecture as an instrument for social empowerment.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Designing women's gyms, swimming pools, YWCAs, and college buildings in the early 20th century, it wasn't just about putting up aesthetically pleasing walls. It was about creating physical, safe spaces for women's social and intellectual advancement.
Right, because before women could effectively organize, vote, or enter the workforce en masse, they needed physical infrastructure that allowed them to gather outside the home.
Exactly. Morgan engineered that infrastructure.
So she is leaving this massive, highly visible concrete mark across the entire state of California. But despite designing the spaces where the public lived, gathered, and organized, the woman behind these monuments fiercely guarded her invisibility as a person.
Yeah. For someone so prolific, her deliberate erasure of her own persona is arguably the most compelling mystery of her life.
She catered to the wealthiest people on the planet, yet her coworkers noted that she dressed like a, quote, nobody. She worked relentlessly, often surviving on minimal sleep and poor nutrition, and she was exceptionally disciplined with finances, a skill she apparently developed back in Paris.
Yeah, when she first moved to France for the Beaux-Arts, her parents provided a strict, finite fund for her first year. And when the money ran low, she didn't ask for more. She simply learned to live on a painfully tight budget.
And she translated that exact financial discipline to her professional life. She was famously brilliant at keeping her clients on budget, which, is incredibly rare for architects of her caliber.
It really is.
But personally, she had no known romantic relationships. She rarely gave interviews. And when she did speak to the press early in her career, she despised the gendered rhetoric they used to describe her accomplishments. She famously stated, "My buildings will be my legacy. They will speak for me long after I'm gone."
And they've spoken loudly. In 2008, she was inducted into the California Hall of Fame. And in 2014, she became the first woman to ever receive the American Institute of Architects' highest award, the AIA Gold Medal.
But so what does this all mean? I have to challenge this philosophy of hers. Why erase yourself?
Right.
Like, if you have Hearst's ear, if you have 700 buildings proving your genius, you have the leverage to be on the cover of every magazine. You have the power to force the culture to acknowledge you. Why choose to hide and dress like a nobody?
Because she understood the mechanics of the media just as well as she understood the mechanics of concrete.
Oh.
Morgan recognized that her persona as a female architect would constantly be used as a distraction. It was a mechanism for the press and her male peers to pigeonhole her, to frame her structural genius as a biological novelty rather than a mathematical fact.
Ah, I see. By actively removing her personality, her fashion, and her private life from the public sphere, she essentially starved the media of the gendered narrative they desperately wanted to write.
Precisely. She forced the world to judge her purely on the undeniable 700 building proof of her supreme competence. She knew that if she played their PR game, they would never take her seriously. So she just refused to step onto the board.
She let the reinforced concrete do the talking. It really shifts your perspective on the physical spaces we move through every day. The next time you walk into a public library, a courtyard, or an old hotel, look past the aesthetics. Consider the unseen hands that designed the load paths and the invisible, deeply entrenched systemic barriers they had to shatter just to lay the very first brick.
Which brings us to a crucial question to leave you with today. Julia Morgan engineered earthquake-proof concrete to ensure her physical buildings survived the brutal forces of nature. But she completely erased her personal life to ensure her professional legacy survived the corrosive forces of the media. In today's world, where we relentlessly demand that creators, artists, and professionals act as public influencers, constantly sharing their lives to build a brand, what incredible world-changing talent are we entirely missing out on simply because they refuse to play the PR game?